Welcome, everybody, to the Inner Carnivore Podcast, episode 13. I'm your host, Carnivore JT. I have a very special guest today, Dr. Ryan Attar. Before we get into it, whether you guys are listening on Spotify, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, or you're watching the show on YouTube, if you guys could do a huge favor, like, subscribe, leave a review. It does a ton for us, and we really, really appreciate it. So going right in, how are you, Dr. Ryan?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on here. I've been following your stuff for a while, first on TikTok and then on Twitter, and I think you have great content, great recipes, man. I saw that you have a cookbook, and like the food you post looks amazing. So yeah, I'm not. I do like to cook, but I don't make anything nearly as impressive as what you do.
I appreciate that. It's actually funny. Like I've had a bunch of people ask me. They're like, "Oh, Vio's like, how did you learn to cook? What did you do?" And I never ever cooked this way, ever. Like I was the most basic person you've ever met. Like I would cook, like prior to doing any of the diet stuff, like carnivore, I would do like your most basic chicken and rice, most basic chicken and broccoli, like always super, super basic because I cooked a lot of food at once. And I was like, man, I don't want to spend time doing this. Like that's a waste of time. And then I started doing carnivore, and it was honestly, I wasn't even planning on like trying to come up with unique stuff. And then it just happened, and people were like, oh, that's super cool. And I was like, well, maybe I'll just like get into it. And I kind of just ran with it. So yeah,
Nice.
it's been crazy. Like from even where I started to now, it's been pretty wild for sure.
Awesome.
But yeah, and I've been following you for quite a while as well, and we've talked a little bit. So before we jump into your story, because it's a super important, super interesting story, what is your professionally? Where are you at right now? How did you get there? What's your training, qualifications, education?
Yeah, so I'm a naturopathic physician and nutritionist. My profession is not in every state. What state are you out of?
Arizona.
Arizona. So we are licensed in Arizona. So you may have heard of my profession. You could think of me as a holistic doctor that's a nutritionist. That's my primary modality is clinical nutrition. Um, and I never thought I would be in the health field at all. Like I was in the Army. I was a captain in the Army. Spent 6 years in, and came down with type 1 diabetes, and makes you unfit for duty. So I was medically retired because of the type 1 diabetes. Got out, did a whole bunch of different things, and did whatever my doctors wanted me to do as far as treating my type 1 diabetes, which doesn't involve anything with diet, which a lot of people would be surprised to hear that there's very little conversation you have about diet when you're talking about type 1 diabetes, or even type 2 diabetes for a lot of people too. They don't get much in the way of good diet. I started figuring things out on my own, like a lot of people do in the health world when they're frustrated with doctors. And I started getting really, really good control of my blood sugars. So much so that like I go to the VA for my healthcare, and they, I have good and bad things to say about the VA. I've been happy with what I get from them, and I get all my diabetic supplies and insulin and all that stuff, which can be expensive for diabetics. But I got a letter from the VA saying, we've reviewed your medical records and labs, and it appears your condition has resolved and you no longer need coverage. Now, I'm an insulin dependent. Type 1 is an insulin dependent diabetic. I'm taking insulin, but I have such good control of my blood sugars that it doesn't look like I have diabetes, because most type 1 diabetics do not take good care of themselves and have erratic blood sugars. I fought that and maintained my coverage at the VA, but yeah, I got frustrated with doctors and still had my GI Bill to use. So I figured let's go back to school and do this myself. I started with a master's in nutrition. I wanted to be a nutritionist and do what I do. I didn't know what a naturopathic physician was. Had no intention of being a physician. My school had the program, and I'm using the GI Bill for school. Why not tack that on? And it expands my scope of practice, lets me do a little bit more, gives me more knowledge of other things. And I yeah, so I ended up doing the doctorate in naturopathic medicine. And, like I said, originally I got into this because I want to help diabetics, but I quickly realized that it's kind of across the board for chronic conditions that were just done wrong by doctors, and we don't have a focus on proper diet, which is crucial for any chronic condition. So yeah, I've been out of school since 2017, and I'm in Connecticut in practice.
That's super cool. Um, what is what have you found is the biggest difference between? So actually, let me start over. Where you got your degree, is that curriculum? So like first year nutrition, is that curriculum the same standard nutrition curriculum you'd get if I went and got a master's at Arizona State or University of Connecticut or whatever? Does that make sense?
Yeah, nutrition is not really standardized. The kind of standardized version of that degree would be to become a dietitian, and it's a profession that's regulated and standardized. Uh, but you've seen dietitians out there that are basically just regurgitating the food pyramid, the my plate, these standard food guidelines that nobody gets healthy off of. And we you're in the kind of health and nutrition world. You've heard a lot of stories and seen a lot of people that have health transformations, and probably both acknowledge that people have health transformations on diets that are different than ours too. A lot of diets might work for people. I do like the way we're doing it the best, but the other things might work. But like you may have heard someone going on a low carb diet, a Mediterranean diet, maybe even a vegetarian or vegan diet, and their health improves. But I have never in my life heard of anyone saying, seen a health transformation and look at them and say, how did you do it? And they said, the food pyramid or the my plate. I started eating this way, and look what it did. That has literally never happened to anyone ever. And that's what basically we're telling people to that's the way we're telling people to eat, but that's the way our dietitians have to follow, basically. And the dietitians are are always involved in that, and they're the ones making the terrible hospital meals that you see pictures of. They're the ones telling school lunches what they should have on their menu. So yeah, it's kind of backward. Like I said, nutritionist is not regulated like that. So um, there are clinical nutrition certifications people can get, but it can vary. What that those guidelines are, and what they're actually are studying, and even putting into practice. So yeah, there's a lot of variety out there.
And I'm super glad you brought up the registered dietitian. One, because I have a dietitian coming on in a couple shows, and two, because I just had this interaction and it was totally out of the blue. And I don't honestly get too many of these interactions on Instagram. Usually it's Twitter, which you see most of. But it was a lady who did a response video to an account I follow, who's a registered dietitian, and she's like, "Man, these carnivores, like, oh, this is crazy. I'm going to do a video on why credentials matter." And I was like, "Oh, I got to see this." And sure enough, it was the same thing. Like, credentials matter because dietitians, they have this, and it's a government regulated field. And I was like, that's fine. Like, it's government regulated is not necessarily bad in and of itself. But when you tell me your field is regulated by the government, and I can see what the government puts out, I already know what you're going to think, right? You're going to regurgitate the food pyramid. You're going to regurgitate, the findings of the American Heart Association. So after you do all your schooling, you get done with your master's of nutrition. How did you then navigate to maybe the government isn't quite? I don't like calling it a conspiracy, right? I don't want to
Yeah,
say that they're intentionally lying to us, but how do you navigate that? Maybe that's not the best practice for people that I'm going to interact with.
yeah. Well, something people should always ask too is when they see these government food guidelines, it's the USDA. U.S. Department of Agriculture. Why is the Department of Agriculture telling us what to eat? It's obviously they're going to have an interest in our cash crops, our agriculture, and that's the base of the food pyramid. Is all those crops. So yeah, I mean it's backward. Now, of course, we don't use the food pyramid anymore, but my plate is the foods that are actually recommended are no different. And I don't think it's going to change. I don't think it's going to get any better. That we were messaging about that guy that made the food compass, the one that put
Mm-hmm.
that paper that put Lucky Charms is healthier than beef or eggs.
Yes.
And I don't know where it left off, but I know he was set to like discuss with the White House about a new food guidelines, which is terrible because he's awful. And if that food compass paper has anything to do with what he's going to be pushing, it's going to be more of the same. And um and yeah, wait. So you were asking, say again what you were asking about?
How did you transition? So like typical education, right? I have, and I don't honestly share this with too many people because I don't think it's necessarily relevant to most conversations. But I have a bachelor's in sports medicine, and then I have
Mhm.
a master's. It's not in nutrition, but I have a master's of science. And so I'm very familiar with how the education system is set up, right? They give
Yeah.
you the information, they give you a textbook, they teach you the basic stuff that you might have to deal with in day to day life, and then they teach you how to look up information, right? And so coming out of with a master's in nutrition, my guess is you probably learned a lot of the similar, food pyramid type stuff, but you're
Not so
also armed.
not so much. The my master's program, had a lot of the basic nutrition stuff that you see everywhere. But it was it was much more open. There was like a functional nutrition course that I
Sure.
did. Now, going into this, I already had kind of figured things out nutrition wise for myself in managing my diabetes. And even during my program, it's still it's still like a minority approach. And I would still get like, if diabetics need 6 small meals a day, diabetics need whole grains to stabilize their blood sugars, and a lot of stuff like that just doesn't work, and doesn't, when put into practice, makes diabetics erratic with their blood sugars. um so I was already going into my studies, knowing that what I'm doing is not the majority
Gotcha.
approach. It's gotten a lot more better accepted, the low carb thing, and I started that in like 2010. I started the low carb diet, and I started school in 2013. And funny enough, a gym got me on a CrossFit gym. I was doing CrossFit, and it started in 2010 before it was like everywhere. And the gym I was at was way ahead of the curve, and they had a paleo diet challenge. And I heard the head coach pitching it, and he was like, everyone should try it. It's great for weight loss. It's great for diabetes. It's great for this and that. And I'm like, I'm a type 1 diabetic. It's not really gonna do anything for me. I always need insulin. He's like, why don't you give it a try? And I did. And it wasn't just a paleo diet challenge that he was doing. It was a low carb paleo diet. And I instantly had like great blood sugars. And I was like, what, how is this? Why is nobody talking about this? Why is this not, being implemented? And that's, that started my process of figuring out nutrition for myself. I eventually found Dr. Bernstein's work, and then really got things, tightly under control. But yeah, I mean, so I'm always against the standards like that. But these days, it's getting much more widely accepted, and even though there's still pushback, it's getting easier.
How do you? So I've seen a bunch. Now, correct me if I have the acronym wrong. Is it the American Diabetes Association?
Yep.
How? So based on like your experience, personal and professional, how do you think? an association like the ADA, because I've seen you post some stuff where they're like, hey, here's some recipes, add a cup of sugar to your meal, and it's just like, I'm not, I don't know that much about diabetes. I'll tell you, like, I've taken some, human physiology classes, and I have the basic understanding, but like that just sets off my alarm. I'm like, wait a minute, like, how does an organization like that promote those kind of things?
Yeah. So yeah, the American Diabetes Association is awful. Their recipe site, which you're talking about, called Diabetes Food Hub, is all terrible recipes. There there's a few low carb things on there, but the vast majority are not low carb. The screenshots that I make and post on Twitter, I specifically choose those recipes because they have added sugar, right? So I could pick any of their recipes and they're all garbage, whole grain, this and that. Um, and but I picked the ones that have added sugar because that's pretty universally agreed on as a bad thing for diabetics. Like, don't add sugar, and they're adding sugar to chilies, to salads. The one you're talking about too was a cucumber. It was like a pickled cucumber salad, and with a quarter cup of sugar in it. They actually took that. I never get a response from any of those posts by the ADA or Dr. Bob, who is their science officer. But that one they took down. They took that recipe down after
I didn't
I
realize that.
posted the cucumber recipe. They didn't acknowledge it. They didn't say anything, but they took it down, and they don't acknowledge any of the other ones. And I'm I like you. I love trolling on the internet, especially when I know I'm right about things. And if they believe in what they're doing, they should defend. They should say, no, Ryan, this recipe is great for diabetics. It's got this and that reasons why a diabetic should eat this. They never respond. They never they never defend any of that. They also, and this is kind of across the board for diabetes treatments, they don't even advocate for a diabetic to have normal and non-diabetic results. Their A1C is a test a diabetic gets that gives kind of average blood sugar control. It's well into the pre-diabetic diabetic range is the target range, and I advocate for non-diabetics should have non-diabetic blood sugars and A1Cs. That seems intuitive that we should be aiming for that, but it's just not the standard. So when you have these high ranges, these high target ranges, of course you can put sugar in your food because I could eat pizza every day and achieve the targets that they set out. So yeah, they're awful. Their previous CEO was actually pretty cool. This woman Tracy Brown. She was the only CEO to this day of the ADA that has diabetes herself. She's a type 2 diabetic. When she took over, and this was probably 2017 or 2018, I always reach out to these people and I'm ask them, like, how do you feel about a low carb approach? How do you feel about this and that? Usually hear nothing. She replied to me and she said, she has type 2 herself. She's looking for, to help the ADA, and she wants all approaches acknowledged, and she wants to just find the best for diabetics. I was like, awesome. I told her a little bit about what I do. I told her about my approach. I told her about Dr. Bernstein, and she was like, wow, very, very interesting. A couple weeks later, she posted on social media reading Dr. Bernstein's book. And he's this 89-year-old type 1 diabetic that has the first, type 1 to advocate for the low carb approach. And, even at 89, he's super healthy and still in practice and doing great things. So she's now reading his book. She went and met him, and she started following a low carb diet herself and went off her oral type 2 diabetes medications. I met her twice. I went down to the ADA once for a meeting, and she's great. But it's a big organization, and she can only do so much to change. She got it into the ADA guidelines that a low carb diet is an acceptable way to manage type 2 diabetes. Didn't say type 1, and didn't say for children too, but she got that into their guidelines. Now they don't give any ways on how to implement this. They don't give any tips or anything like that, but she did kind of make that little change. So there was that. She's no longer the CEO, and it almost seems like things have kind of rolled back there and gotten even worse. But yeah, they're awful. And as you see on Twitter, I troll them as much as I can. And that guy, Dr. Bob, I go after a lot. He also doesn't. He's their science officer. So you'd think if they're getting criticisms, let's defend yourself. That you show me the science, and he just never will. He never replies. He a couple of years ago had because he's like, anyone goes on Twitter and looks at Dr. Bob Gabby, you'll see what I'm talking about. He's not the healthiest looking guy. A few years ago, it looked like he was trying to get himself healthy, and he posted a breakfast, a picture of him eating breakfast, or it was a video, and it was an omelet, and no hash browns, no bread, just the omelet, and he said, "This is a healthy way of eating, and this is a healthy choice I'm making today." Great, that's great that he's figuring that out, but their guidelines don't even support what he's doing. So it's like, it's okay for him to do, but not for the millions of diabetics that are, forced to follow their guidelines. And the doctors that follow the ADA's guidelines are pushing this on their patients too. So yeah, they're a big problem. Fortunately, these days it's easy to get information now, and people are figuring out pretty quickly when they get diagnosed diabetes. If somebody's intuitive and wants to figure things out, the information's out there, so they can get around these things. But for the majority, they're just getting the same high carb standard of care recommendations from their doctors. Yeah.
So I have a couple things I want to dive into that. Specifically for a diabetic, type 1 or type 2, what happens from a physiological standpoint when they eat added sugar?
Yeah. So, for both type 1 and type 2, I'm a big advocate for a low carb approach. It's the best for managing diabetes, and I think added benefit, just overall health benefits. For type 1, now I'm insulin dependent. I wear an insulin pump. You can manage type 1 with an insulin pump. You can manage it with injections. I need insulin. There's nothing I can do that takes that away. Now, the low carb diet makes me insulin sensitive, and it makes me be able to use very low doses of insulin. Every time I eat, I have to dose my meal, and carbohydrates need a lot of insulin. Protein needs insulin too. It's very small, and it's very mild. And I use a special older, milder insulin for my protein meals that's even slower than the standard meal insulin. Because of this, because I'm using these low mild doses, and I'm eating this low carb diet, it's very easy to match those numbers up. And it's not always perfect, but if I'm off, I'm just off by a little bit, high or low, and it's either I don't need to do anything, or I use a small correction to bring me back. A high carb diet, or even a moderate carb diet, needs a lot of insulin. And now you're calculating a high dose of insulin for the carbohydrates in that meal, and you're riding a roller coaster. And you'll sometimes see type 1 diabetics post their glucose monitor graphs, and they have a nice day or meal, but it's really rolling the dice every time. And when you pull back and look at their averages, they're always riding up and down with their blood sugars. And both ways are dangerous for us too. The highs are giving us long-term complications. All the long-term complications of diabetes come from high blood sugars. And then the lows are a short-term problem, because you could, have a seizure, you could pass out, and it could be very dangerous. So, they're running into both of those because of that roller coaster ride. So that's why I advocate for low carb with type 1 diabetic. For type 2 diabetics, it's a whole different reason. They're insulin resistant, and there's a lot of different reasons for someone to become insulin resistant. becoming overweight, excessive eating, excessive high carb eating, especially, it's going to make you insulin resistant. And then your body just needs a lot more insulin to be able to maintain blood sugars. Eventually, this starts wearing someone's pancreas out. They start getting beta cell burnout. So eventually, the amount of insulin that their pancreas is making is not enough to keep blood sugars in the normal range. And then they're just having chronic elevated blood sugar. So, at that point, they have to get put on meds, and, it's usually progressive from there. They get multiple different diabetes medications, and eventually their pancreas will be completely burnt out that they need insulin. And, the standard of care doesn't really push them to cut out the carbs and try to, get off all their meds. It just tries to treat the blood sugars with whichever med the doctor is going for at that time. There are, I think, like metformin, I think, is a great type 2 diabetic medication. There's a lot of medications out there that I don't care for as much, but the meds combined with the diet is what the type 2 diabetic needs until they can normalize their blood sugars and wean off of that, or need to indefinitely stay on those medications. But the low carb diet can definitely get people there. There's a couple other things that a type 2 diabetic needs to make sure is in place as well. Weight loss, of course, needs to happen. Exercise needs to happen. And probably one that doesn't get talked about enough, and I think it's almost as important as diet, is sleep. And I can't tell you how many type 2 diabetics I've had that I get on the low carb diet. Their numbers improve, but they still are way too high. And it almost always turns out they have sleep apnea. And I send them for a sleep study, and we find this, and we get the apnea treated, and then finally their blood sugars normalize. So yeah, that's kind of my approach for both type 1 and type 2 diabetes. And there's a lot of insulin resistant and type 2 diabetics out there, and I know our favorite Twitter Dr. Allo likes to downplay this, but one in 2 individuals in the USA has at least prediabetes or diabetes. It's probably even higher than that because there's a lot of undiagnosed as well. So 1 in 2. So that's half of people are insulin resistant. And I don't even like the high end of the normal range too. So if I were in charge, I would lower the A1C, the pre-diabetic range with A1C down a little bit, and it would be more than half people are insulin resistant. And yeah, so and the sooner you address your insulin resistance and blood sugars, the better you're going to be long term. You're not going to burn out your beta cells. You're going to be able to completely reverse things.
I'm glad you brought up Dr. Allo.
Who just blocked you today?
Just blocked me today.
You're finally in the clear.
So a couple things that he's posted, and not just him, these are, have circulated around. How do you respond, given that you've treated your own type 1 diabetes, that you treat people for diabetes professionally? How do you respond to studies that come out from what we believe, like the average person believes that Harvard is a prestigious institution, that Oxford is a prestigious institution? How do you respond to studies and headlines that show up on Fox News and CNN that say red meat causes diabetes?
Yeah. And it happens a lot. Then there was one just like that recently. And, often that's what the headlines say. And, it's often hard to even find the actual study that those headlines are referencing. And when it does, they're usually these surveys that are questioning the population about their diet and asking them, do they eat red meat? And do you have diabetes or whatever? Or maybe they're looking at medical records or not, but they're surveying them about their diet. And it turns out the ones that are insulin resistant and diabetic are tending to eat more meat. Um, there's correlation and there's causation, right? And so the a lot of people are afraid of red meat, and a lot of health conscious people are afraid of red meat. And so if you're a generally healthy person, you go to the doctor regularly, you exercise, you don't smoke, you take multivitamin, maybe you do whatever else you do for your health. You're taking care of yourself, and you also don't eat red meat because you see these headlines. Now, the rest of the population, the more unhealthy people, are they're eating red meat, but they're eating everything, and they're not going to the doctor. Maybe they smoke, maybe they drink too much, and they also have diabetes, and so they're blaming the meat for that when there's tons of other things that those folks are doing that are likely causing their health issues. They call it the healthy user and unhealthy user bias. And when you look at healthy people eating meat, you don't see these things. You see the complete opposite. Yeah.
So it's interesting you bring up hard to get that study. So I remember when it first came out, it was just a few weeks ago. Typically a news article will link the study, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, since the study's in a current edition, I forget what health journal it was in, because it was in a current edition, you either had to have institutional access or you had to pay for it. And so all you could see was the abstract.
Yep.
And usually you'll get some information from the abstract. You'll figure out how they did their, methods, how they came up with their conclusion. This article is the least informative abstract I've ever read in my entire life.
Mm-hmm.
Literally gave you nothing. And so I did. I found somebody that I know that attends Harvard right now, and he sent me the full PDF. And again, I'm not a doctor. I don't pretend to be a doctor. I don't even put out my schooling because I don't think it's relevant for the most part. But it is super easy to read some of these studies. And
Mm-hmm.
for people that don't understand what you're saying about the questionnaire, not only did this study start back in the 70s, where the questionnaire changed over the course of their study, so they had to, account for that. But the survey was sent out every, I believe it was 2.5 years, up to 2.5 years, and it would ask people about their diet, which is fine, except I don't know anybody who could tell you whether they had 1 serving of red meat, 2 servings of red meat, 3 servings of red meat, 4 servings of red meat, or 5 servings of red meat over the course of a week. And the most people don't even understand what a serving of red meat is, or how to figure that out, or how to weigh it, or any of that. And then you look even further, and then you go into what quantifies as red meat, and you see stuff like lasagna and sandwiches. And if I go to McDonald's and get a Big Mac, that counts as red meat.
Yeah.
And so now all of this is going into it, and you go, well, how is that? You brought the correlation causation. How does that equal this? Like it makes no sense to me whatsoever. And I honestly, I don't know. Like I know there's a lot of variance in studies. Like I can go find studies that say broccoli's going to kill me, and I can find studies that say broccoli's going to save my life. How do we get to that? Like how do we get to the point where somebody publishes a study that said red meat's going to kill you, when so many other factors say that it's not true? Like I don't understand how we get there.
Yeah. And, often the people that are proudly pushing these studies, that they're not going to engage and explain the mechanisms behind what the study is claiming, or anything like that. They're just literally posting that headline. And yeah, you're right. You can find studies to back almost any idea that somebody has about nutrition, and yeah, I think to kind of navigate that, one needs a good understanding of just overall human health and biochemistry to kind of break these things down and really understand what's going on, and actually read the study and see what they're doing, because the headline that says red meat causes diabetes, if it were more accurate, would be, those including meat in their standard American diet, have higher rates of diabetes than, other people not including meat, but, not taking into account all of the other health factors that might be influencing that. Um, yeah, and the same people that are, you know, pushing this kind of research don't ignore the other stuff out there. When it comes to diabetics, there was a Harvard study in 2018 on a group of type 1 diabetics called Type 1 Grit, which is a Facebook group of Bernstein followers, and there's a couple thousand in the group now, maybe like even 3 or 4,000. There's a lot, and the study was looking at mostly children too, because that's one thing you might be able to convince somebody to try a low carb diet, an adult, but you will immediately get pushback of saying it's not safe for kids. Kids need carbs. Um, and that 2018 study looked at children following this low carb diet and Bernstein method. They had phenomenal blood sugar control that you don't see in any type 1 studies, like normal non-diabetic range. They had good lipids. They had all the markers that they tested for were great, and they were happy. They enjoyed the way they're eating, and that's something you'll hear push back a lot as well. Like, just because you're diabetic, you still have to enjoy life. You still have to eat this and that. But people tend to enjoy this way of eating and don't want to change that. And my favorite thing in that study, looking at these type 1 kids, was the kids were above average height. In the type 1 world, type 1 diabetic kids are normally shorter on average. Their growth is stunted because of the poor blood sugar control that even the standard of care gets someone. These kids were not only weren't their growth stunted, they were above average. They were taller than their peers. And you can probably totally see this. Someone that's focused on protein, especially a growing kid, their body's gonna respond and grow to its full potential eating that protein. You never hear anyone cite this study. You never hear the ADA talking about this study. A friend of mine once hosted a Bethany from Let Me Be 83, is a charity for type 1 diabetics using this method. She hosted a little meeting with the ADA, with Tracy Brown, the former CEO, and I went to it. And the old science officer from the ADA, not Dr. Bob, but the guy before him, his name escapes me, but he used to be the Surgeon General of the USA. He's a type 1 diabetic as well. Looks as unhealthy as Dr. Bob too, so he's got that going for him. He Skyped into the meeting, so he was there. We kept talking about, and the purpose of the meeting was for the ADA to learn ways to maybe do better for a low carb approach. This is another great thing that Tracy Brown did. She was really trying to make changes. At some point, we started talking about low carb diet for kids, and their science officer chimed in, and he's like, there's no evidence that a low carb diet is safe for kids, for their growth and for their health. We can't advocate for that. And I was like, first, did you see that 2018 study? Of course he didn't. He didn't even read it. I mean, he's an endocrinologist working at the American Diabetes Association, and he's not going to read every study that comes out in diabetes, which is insane. He's their science officer. And then I asked him, I was like, how do you know, is your diet safe for kids? Like have you tested the currently recommended diet for kids? Do you realize we have an epidemic of childhood obesity? We have type 2 diabetic children. What is your diet safe for kids? And he had nothing. He had no reply, no response for that. But yeah, that's what we're up against with the science. And yeah, and I think you don't have to be a doctor. You don't have to have an advanced degree to read these things. And there may be a few things that confuse someone reading one of those, but I think you'll get the vast majority of what's written in these papers. And I think it would surprise people to actually see how easy they are to follow.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, because that's going back to Dr. Allo. And for anybody that does know Dr. Allo, I don't if he would keep to himself, I honestly wouldn't have as big of a problem with him. It is the fact that he's a cardiologist. He's very much on the LDL is going to kill you train. We should gene alter to get LDL down to literally zero. Like we should start testing for LDL in kids when they're first born, which it's just a parrot of the American Heart Association. I get there's probably tens of thousands of cardiologists that share his views. Maybe tens of thousands, maybe a little high, but it's the approach that he takes when people question it, right? Because there's numerous studies that have come out, especially from a cholesterol standpoint, showing that LDL may not be the biomarker for heart disease that we thought it was. And you can't have a conversation with him because he does exactly what you just said, which is, no, I'm a doctor. I am a cholesterol professional, and you don't know what you're talking about. You can't even read a study. You don't know what cholesterol is. Don't talk to me. Which is why I loved to like troll on him as much as I can, because it doesn't take an advanced degree. And for people that are, intimidated by a study, you honestly don't have to look into the in-depths of the methods and the equations that they used and all of this stuff, because for the most part, if you can understand the abstract, maybe understand the methodology, and then understand the conclusion, you can get a pretty good idea of it. And that's actually what got me blocked, is he responded to somebody about LDL, and I honestly don't care about his stance on LDL. I just wanted to prove him wrong, or at least offer an anti-argument to him. And he responded to somebody and said, no, the particle size of LDL doesn't matter at all. Does not matter. Don't test for it. And so within 5 minutes, I posted a study that showed that in their study that smaller LDL and more dense particles were a greater atherogenic effect. And then he blocked me. And I was like, okay, you can't even
Wow.
debate, because that's the problem. I can find both. So for somebody to come out, I can't go on to anybody's post and say red meat is the only way for you to be healthy, and I have studies that prove it as a fact. It's just not out there. Just like somebody can't come on and say vegan is the only way to be healthy. It's a proven fact. Here it is.
Yeah.
You have to be able to at least look at a study and go, okay, there's some points here, there's some points there. I'm gonna start listening to people and come up with my own conclusion.
Yeah. Yeah. He's like a robot. He doesn't think for himself. He just regurgitates the guidelines. And he even says, you can see his tweets where he says the guidelines and consensus statements are the highest form of evidence. And that doesn't make any sense at all. It's not evidence at all. Those are people's opinions based on the evidence. But that just kind of shows you where his mind is at. I originally started trolling him, if you want to call it that. We're talking about diabetes and sugar, and he's big on sugar doesn't cause diabetes. You could eat Twinkies and lose weight and all this other garbage. And something with heart disease and sugar, and he failed to acknowledge that there's any connection. And I shared a picture of a bunch of junk food cereals, sugary cereals that have the American Heart Association's logo on them, and he was defending that. He said, we shouldn't have food phobias. People can have those in moderation. And his tweet that I always screenshot and repost, I think it's like, "What's wrong with sugar?" And he's ridiculous. And I pointed out many contradictions of things that he's posted, and he eventually blocked me a while ago, months ago. And doesn't want to defend his points. He just blocks people. You can tell he's trying to sell something too, because he doesn't want these negative comments, because he's trying to sell his book and whatever else he does, his shitty weight loss and bodybuilding book.
Yeah, it's so for people that don't know, I think this is actually how I first started interacting with Ryan. Is he has the name Dr. Tricks because of this, because it was Tricks that he was defending as what's wrong with Tricks. That was his literal response, is what's wrong with Tricks is just food. And you're like, okay, like I don't have to be and this is where I love with him. And unfortunately, like, people think I pick on him a lot, but he's just the example of so many doctors out there.
Yeah.
He just takes it more seriously as trying to post consistently, and he likes to go after people.
Yeah.
I kind of ignored him until he started going after a whole bunch of doctors that I respect their opinion on, and making videos telling them that they're idiots, they don't know what they're talking about. And so then I was like, okay, I'm gonna start plugging into this a little bit. And that's the attitude, and his attitude is cardiology, especially, like, nobody should talk to him about cholesterol because he's a cardiologist. And then he talks about nutrition and sugar
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
he's this some expert. And then when I really got into it is his views on personal training, um, which I never even dropped anything on it. And I'm like, bro, I do have advanced degrees in that study. I was a professional. Um, I have done more than you have, and yes, I like. So we're going to talk about this, and you're going to do this expertise thing. But I think he comes up a lot, and I post a lot, and people are like, why do you give him? Why do you talk about him? Like, because it's so representative of so many doctors out there.
Yeah.
And
You know,
just because,
I'm with you. And like, occasionally I go after just normal people on Twitter if they're doing something absurd. But I feel like we have to go after authorities and doctors on Twitter and call them out because they're they're making the rules for everyone, and we need to point it out when they're wrong.
yeah, at 100%. And he doesn't get a ton of engagement, but, and I always thought he was pretty low key, but he's got over like 150,000 followers on TikTok.
Yeah.
And he doesn't get a lot of views. He doesn't get a lot of, likes, and same with YouTube. But there's still people out there seeing this. Like, there's people out there who see him and go, oh, he's a double board certified cardiologist. He's an expert on this. He's the one that I need to listen to. And if there's no ability to defend your position, you don't have to tell me that, you know, you defending your position by saying you're wrong is not the way to do it.
Yeah.
Like, I
Yeah.
have I have access to almost every single study that's ever been published. Like, that's not something you could do anymore. Now, back in the 40s and 50s when there's no internet, sure. You can say
Yeah.
I'm the only one with access to information, I'm the one that's right. But that approach is it's so crazy to me.
Yeah. And you posted today his because he's always bragging about his physical prowess and muscles, and you posted that picture of him doing the sloppiest looking deadlift ever. And yeah, I mean he's he's not overweight, but he's like flabby looking and has a little bit of man boobs, and yeah, he does not look. He's not someone I would model my health or fitness after.
Yeah, and that is my other point is from what I listen to on a doctor's standpoint. I listen to people who either look how I want to look, or they have an expertise that I don't have and I'm not able to comprehend. Comprehend might be a little bit strong, but I can comprehend for the most part what cholesterol does. Right now, if he asked me to go in and, like, start treating cholesterol conditions or perform a surgery, no, that's out of my league. You're the expert. But if you're going to tell me that your expertise is in reading studies, well, I can do that too. And that's where I think there's a really big problem is surgeons. Absolutely, I have the highest respect for surgeons. I can never do your job. I've never pretend to do your job. But, like, all of these, figuring out pathologies and you using these studies and then telling me I don't know how to read studies, that's what I think is the biggest problem, because that's what people are going to see. They're going to go to their general practitioner. The general practitioner is going to look at their blood work and go, oh, you've got this, let's get you on a statin. And I
Yeah.
think that's the craziest thing ever.
If if you if Dr. Allo, someone like him, really truly believed, the information that they put out, um, he'll always post to that that he eats meat, that he eats steak occasionally. It looks like awful, like super lean, overcooked garbage, but he'll put, I know I eat it sometimes. Like, if you truly believed of the information that he's putting out, why would you even want to be in the same room as a steak? So yeah, he doesn't seem to have that kind of conviction in his own views.
Yeah, it's that's the problem that I have, like, for sure. And the other problem is I have is, even with a little bit of science background and understanding of the human body, if your body is resolving issues, responding well, and you are becoming healthier by almost every metric, and like by that I mean your mental health, your inflammatory conditions, your weight loss, if everything is improving, there is a good chance you're doing something right with your diet.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I have yet to see people who are like, you can see some people that look healthy who are like, yeah, I have Pop Tarts before, but they don't eat that all the time. I'm not saying that you can only be healthy with low carb. I'm not saying you can only be healthy by never eating processed foods. But if you have a bunch of conditions, which are an indication that there's something going on metabolically, and you are able to resolve these, you're able to control your blood sugars, you're able to get off insulin, you're able to any number of things, there's probably a good chance that what you're doing is good for your body.
Question: Did you get into this way of eating for your own, like, it was with specific health reasons, or just general health, preventative health?
I got into it because I was tired of feeling like crap.
Mm-hmm.
And when I say feeling like crap is I've done the bodybuilding thing where I've chicken and rice, chicken and broccoli. I've had good success from like a physical standpoint. It was a little bit harder once I became a dad and was trying to lose the dad bod weight, but I did Whole30, like strict, no processed foods, no, and I did it for 90 days, vegetables, lean meats, and I lost weight and my body composition was changing, but I bloated every single time.
Yeah.
I felt terrible. And it was after 90 days that I was like, this was the worst thing ever. Like, why did I just do this to feel bad? Like, I don't care that
Yeah.
I lost 15 pounds. And so I immediately gained the weight back on because I was like, this is dumb, and just ate whatever I wanted. And it was finally an aha moment where I was like, man, I don't like feeling like I'm bloated, 12 hours a day. Like, this
Yeah.
shouldn't be how it works. And then that's when I got into, my wife sent me Paul Saladino.
Mm-hmm.
And for anybody out there, like, I don't agree with everything Saladino says. I think he has good intentions and I think he's a little quirky. But he said, and I resonated with some of it, so I tried it, and then I just immediately felt better. And I was like, man,
Mm-hmm.
like, okay. Like, I wasn't trying to resolve anything. I just wanted to feel better.
Yep.
And then I started looking better, and then I started having more energy because I was working better and I was working out more, and it just snowballed in.
It's good that you recognize that you needed to improve that stuff, because I feel like a lot of people are just living their lives feeling this way, and that's just normal, and they don't realize that they can feel better. That, like, just whatever bloating and fatigue and everything else that they're feeling, that just becomes normal. And it doesn't, if they make some changes and get to feeling good, they're really surprised, like, oh wow, this is how I'm supposed to feel. And that can make staying on a diet or lifestyle much easier for a lot of people if they're getting those results.
And that's honestly why I started the page. I started about 6 months after I started my social media accounts, about 6 months after I started. And it was because from a outside view, I was about as healthy as you could get in my 20s, right? Like, get down to crazy low body fat, which I'm not saying is healthy, but I would maintain a very healthy looking physique in my 20s. And I remember bloating being normal. Like,
Mm,
that's a bodybuilding joke, right? You wake up first thing in the morning, you take your progress pictures because that's the leanest you'll be all day. And as soon as you look at a glass of water, you'll puff up and you'll gain 6 pounds. And like, that's just life. The
mm,
stretchy pants at Thanksgiving.
mhm.
And I started it because I was like, man, like, you guys don't have to feel like that's not normal. We think it's normal, but that's not normal. Like, you can eat pretty much as you want and like get off the dinner table and be like, okay, I'm ready to go do something. Like, I don't need to like sit around and take a nap.
Yeah.
And it wasn't even any of these crazy stories that I've heard and that I've had people on the show where they're, reversing diseases and getting off medications. I didn't start it for that. I just started it for a normal person to be like, hey, you don't have to feel this way all the time.
Yeah.
And then I got into all the craziness that I've discovered since.
And I in my practice, I use, I work on a diet with everyone. Not always a carnivore approach, but if I'm working with a diabetic and they don't have any other issues, just a low carb approach with protein focused diet, great. But any kind of autoimmune issues, GI issues, or just random health things that they haven't been able to address with whatever other doctors in the past or whatever else they did, I always do an elimination diet and some degree of carnivore diet, in that elimination. And it's tough to get someone to do meat only. I have worked with patients on this, and they want to, and they're willing to do it, and they do great with it. That I'll add in a little bit of low carb vegetables, or basically the AIP, autoimmune protocol diet, for those that can't do the carnivore thing. And it almost always gets to the root cause of what's going on. And I always do some kind of reintroduction too, so we can find specifically what foods are the culprit. Just even if they don't incorporate a lot more back into their diet, they should know what the culprits are and be able to avoid them if they're not preparing their own food. But it's the carnivore is the ultimate elimination diet, and it can address a lot of different health issues that people are just living with daily.
Yeah, and that's why I started and did the recipe book, was because I wanted to show just normal people that that's what it is. It's elimination diet, but you don't have to go hardcore lion diet right off the gate. Like I didn't. And that's another reason I started the page, is for well over a year, I was still eating, a serving or two of fruit and some honey. And if I was going to do a recipe that had tomatoes, that was fine. Like maybe peppers. I stayed away from most vegetables just because I didn't like the way I felt. But I wasn't, I'd still use spices and some herbs from time to time. And the whole point was like, hey, like if you guys just did this, like if you guys just started cutting out some stuff and even went remotely close, you'd feel a lot better. And a lot of people have results that I did where I felt really good, and then I slowly stopped seeing the need for the carbs, and then I just got less and less and didn't miss it. And now I'm day 7 of BBBE, beef, bacon, butter, and eggs, with virtually no carbs. Like I'm not going to say it's no carbs, because you find trace carbs in pretty much everything.
Yeah.
And I feel
Nice.
great. Like had I done this a year ago, I would have been like, oh my gosh, like I'm feeling shaky, like my mind's not. And it's, people think that that's what you have to jump into from the very beginning, which is why I like the low carb approach. Like just start lowering your carbs, get rid of the processed foods, get rid of the processed everything, and then see how you feel. And then oftentimes you're like, I feel pretty good, but I think I could feel better. So I'm going to go a little bit further. And then by that time you're seeing results, and it's easy. Like it's easy to keep going once you start seeing stuff.
Yeah, it is. It's motivating. One kind of like bridge I've used for a lot of people that need an elimination diet is to do meat carnivore with fruit. Not necessarily sweet fruit, because most of my patients are having other metabolic issues, or they need to lose weight, or they're diabetic. But the vegetables that are fruit, squash, zucchini, cucumber, avocado, olives, coconut, and the idea being that the anti-nutrients are in the parts of the plant that the plant doesn't want us eating, but a plant wants us eating its fruit and discarding the seeds to grow a new plant, right? So you can make a pretty normal looking meal with those vegetable, fruit, and meat, and like somebody might not even know that they're kind of eating an elimination meal. And it's a good bridge for a lot of people to really quickly start feeling better, and making sure that they're not eating a food that might be bothering them.
Yeah, and that's, once you start doing that, you start realizing what, like that's probably the biggest one. People think that we're a little bit crazy, and they're like, you're scared of vegetables, or oh, come on, you wouldn't even notice. There's no way you can tell. I'm like, once you like start eliminating, that's the whole point of elimination diet. Once you start getting on that track, you can tell. And no, I'm not scared of vegetables. I just know that I'm not going to feel great. And
Right.
yeah, so it's like, why would I eat something that I know I'm not going to feel great with? That just doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah. And somebody might again, I always frame a elimination diet like this. We're going to be really strict for the first month or so. You're going to feel a lot better. Then after that, we do a reintroduction. We do it very slowly. We try different foods, so we know exactly what bothering you. It might be a lot of foods. It might be one or two foods, but the only way to really know is to be strict for this given period of time, and see.
Yeah, no, absolutely. All right, so before we got to go, if you have people out there who are diabetic or not, right? Like maybe they're pre-diabetic, they're diabetic, they're getting information that's conflicting, right? Like I can go online and find probably 5 different methods to how I should treat my diabetes, and their doctor's probably giving them one of them. What do you recommend for them to get more information on their own? Like where do they start to
Yeah,
research to help figure out what might work best for them?
yeah. I always say this, that they should start with the premise that they are going to achieve normal and non-diabetic blood sugars, and they need to know what normal and non-diabetic blood sugars are. It's not those very broad guidelines that they give you. My A1C, and if it's any diabetics out there, they'll be very surprised to hear this. My A1C has been under 5 for almost a decade. So 4.6 was my last A1C. And I feel optimally we should be low fives and under fives for A1C. So start with that idea and work backwards from that, and check your blood sugar. If you don't have a CGM, you can get a glucometer very cheaply over the counter. Make sure your blood sugars aren't spiking, and see what foods are doing to you. Test your blood sugar before and after eating a given food, and don't eat those foods that are spiking you. What you're going to find is it's these high carb foods. So I follow Bernstein's method. His book is called Diabetes Solution, and it is, people think of it as a low carb diet guide. It's much more than that. It's a comprehensive diabetes management guide for both type 1 and type 2, although it is a little bit more towards type 1, but it applies to both. Um, it's an amazing book, and it has everything in it. There's also a documentary called with the same name, Diabetes Solution, and I'm actually interviewed in it, and it's all about folks following his method, and he's in it as well. It's on Amazon Prime, I believe. But yeah, start with those things, and work backwards from that, and don't don't um don't go for anything but normal and non-diabetic numbers. That should be your goal, and every diabetic can achieve that. If it can't happen just through diet, then you likely need a little bit of medication or insulin or something, but you can achieve those normal numbers one way or another.
That's awesome. So, for people that want to get more information about you, follow along with what you're doing, what social media sites are you on?
Yeah, they can follow my website, drattar.com, drattar.com. If you're in the New England area, you can book an appointment. I do telehealth too, so feel free to reach out if you need any help. Twitter, I'm Ryan Attar on Twitter, I think. Yeah. I have a TikTok. I haven't made videos in a while, but I'm going to be getting back into that as well. It's Dr. Ryan Attar on TikTok. And I have a professional Facebook page too. Twitter, I'm the most active. If you're easily offended by some friendly trolling on Twitter, then avoid. But if you find that stuff entertaining, tune in.
Most people that are following me, I'm guessing they find it entertaining because otherwise they wouldn't be following me.
Sure.
So, man, I really appreciate you coming on.
Thanks.
I
Thanks for
love
having me.
these. I love these conversations because I think it's super important to get people like wrap their head around so that it doesn't have to be the way that your standard doctor or government guidelines say. Like there's more to it, and there's more stuff that you can do and research that you can be exposed to that could potentially help somebody. So I really appreciate it. Everybody go give Dr. Attar a follow. I will link all of his stuff in the descriptions here. I appreciate you guys all listening. Give a like, subscribe, leave a review. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you guys next time.